At night, the battalion was raised on alarm. Combat Gryazev briefly reported that we are going to the area of the city of Yotsevo to eliminate the airborne dropped in the immediate rear of our troop. All units should be in full combat readiness. The commander did not say about the number of paratroopers and their location. Perhaps such information he did not. Tatadzis roar harshly. The soldiers anxiously look around, ready to immediately enter the battle. The forest encloses the road with a dark wall. At night it seems especially mysterious. Somewhere in its thicket hides the enemy. Each bush, a separate tree, make you look more closely and listen closely, so that through the noise of engines to catch extraneous sounds. But the forest, shrouded in darkness, is silent. I sit in the cab of the car ahead. Once in a while I stick my head out to make sure that the other vehicles are following, and every time I see the front rows of soldiers sitting in the back. They are listening to Siroshtan's inexhaustible stories. Vazir appeared a quarter of an hour before boarding the cars, unarmed, with his head uncovered and in galoshes tied with twine. "Where are you from, Vazir?" I wondered. "Did you run away from the infirmary?" "How can you do that, Comrade Lieutenant?" He objected with a faint chuckle. "Deserters are running, and I asked to go to the front line, true. I was in a great hurry and forgot something in the infirmary. Only I wanted to express my opinion on this matter, as the thrifty Okremenko had already shoved Siroshtan's cap and stubborn soldier's boots." "Get in the car, Sergeant," I said decisively. When I reported to the commander about the return of Siroshtana, he ordered the chief of staff in the next report to inform that the sergeant was not wanted. At dawn we went to the designated area, unhindered. The brakes rattled. The cars stopped. It was heard in the column. "Unload." Commanders deployed units, sent out a guard. The companies surrounded the commander, near which stands an elderly man dressed in a striped jacket and the same pants, tucked into his boots. In spite of the warm summer morning, the stranger is holding an Ushanka hat, which he, worrying, is mercilessly squeezing with strong, dry fingers. "Here, comrades commanders," as Gryazevi, a local resident, Stefan Timofeyevich Vorotnikov, saw Nazis armed to the teeth between the highway and the railroad. At the request of the commander, Stepan Timofeyevich repeated the story. In the evening, about 10 airplanes threw out a landing. Vorotnikov, who knew every path in the area, snuck deep into the forest and counted more than 100 parachutists in one of the large glades. "Is the situation clear?" Gryazev looked around at those present. "See clear," Lieutenant Voronov answered for everyone. "I would like to clarify what the parachutists are armed with." "Repeat, Comrade Vorotnikov, what weapons the parachutists have," he asked the commander. "Almost all of them have these things." Vorotnikov pointed at the commander's automatic rifle. "Only they have shorter and all iron. Some carried 2 long iron-on slings." From the story of the respected Stepan Timofeyevich, it is easy to understand that most of the parachutists are armed with automatic rifles, Gryazev emphasized. "They also have machine guns. You should remember this fact very well. They have machine guns, we have rifles, so be careful. The main calculation on surprise, ambushes, and accurate fire. Remember reconnaissance, not a step. I combat unfolded the map, gestured an invitation to come closer. Look, judging by Stefan Timofeyevich's story, we should comb this area." He circled with a red pencil woodland south of the highway. "We will chase the fascists to the railroad, along which took the defense units of one of our units. If the paratroopers don't fight, they'll run into this barrier. If they cannot break through this barrier, then we will be the object of their attacks. Perhaps they will try to break through our battle lines. The conclusion is that behind the combat order of each company must have a strong reserve, at least a third of the total force." Gryazev gave a number of recommendations on the organization of the battle, distributed between the companies of the forest strips for combing. Our company was to operate on the right flank, so the commander ordered me and the commander of the left flank company to take the necessary measures so that the enemy did not bypass us. In an effort to save time, I explained the situation and the received task in detail to the platoon and squad commanders at the same time. At the same time, I find out if there are hunters in the company. Hunting develops observation and the ability to shoot accurately at a suddenly appearing target. In addition, hunters, as a rule, move silently and well-oriented in the forest. To my surprise, almost all of my mortars were the first to declare themselves hunters. "What game were you hunting, Fyodor Mefodievich?" Brashenko, stepping from foot to foot and sniffing his duck nose, is embarrassedly silent. No, for woodcocks, Messer Stan hastened to help his friend. But Brashenko only looked at him suspiciously, fearing a trick. Well, Arkev Fedor Mefodivich hunted chickens and poultry, Comrade Lieutenant, Vasil added with the same seriousness. Embarrassed by the general attention and the cheerful smiles of his comrades, Brashenko muttered quietly, I hunted for various things, Comrade Lieutenant. In general, from the conversation with the volunteers, I realized that none of them was seriously interested in hunting, and yet I did not hesitate to entrust my proven mortars to lead the reconnaissance. In reserve, I leave a platoon of Lieutenant Kalinin, not only because Kalinin was the most experienced commander, but also for the reason that in his platoon were all my mortars, and in them I saw the support. No sooner had I turned the company in combat order, as appeared Okrymenko, followed by 6 soldiers with thermoses in their hands. Comrade, Okrymenko is panting from the fast running. Permission to distribute hot soup to the soldiers. It was prepared for dinner. It will be lost. The flies will eat it. There was less than half an hour before the signal. All right, Nikolai Fedorovitch. I waved my hand, quickly pour the soup, and let them go to their places immediately. Misha Stogov gives me a slightly steaming kettle. I invite Stolnikov. Millet soup with meat was not particularly hot, and we quickly eat it. By the appointed time, the platoons deployed in the directions indicated to them. As always, unexpectedly, a red rocket flew into the air, announcing the beginning of the battle. The soldiers, running from tree to tree, silently moved forward. There is a frightening silence in the forest. I know from personal experience that the expectation of danger is much harder on the psyche than meeting it. I involuntarily quicken my step. Hurry, hurry, I whisper. Where are you, the lurking enemy? Show yourself. At the mere sight of you, my heart will burst into a rage that will drown out all feelings except one, to crush you like a poisonous viper at any cost, D.I. The first rifle shots rang out on the left flank of the company. They were immediately drowned out by the crackle of machine guns. I rushed to a thick pine tree, stopped behind it, and looked around. With the beginning of the firefight, the soldiers lay down. Silently, I move forward. Misha Stogov and Petrenko are running next to me, not a step behind me. Suddenly, from behind the nearest trees, a figure rushed out. I can hardly restrain the desire to shoot, and rightly so. In the man running towards me, I recognize our new hunter, lanky Brashenko. Germans, there, he wheezed, panting, and showed in the direction from where he ran, about 40 pieces. The end immediately became easier. The enemy is detected. The fact that Brashenko counted the fascists piece by piece makes me smile. The one who first detects the enemy gets the opportunity to seize the initiative in the battle. I learned this truth during my years of study. I'm stopping the forward platoons. With them remains Political Officer Stolnikov, and we with Lieutenant Kalinin, taking a group of fighters from his platoon, go after Fyodor Brashenko, hoping to get behind the saboteurs. However, the parachutists had no rear. They, as the scouts reported, took a circular defense. The most dense, it was on the side of the highway. Fascist reconnaissance still detected the deployment of the battalion on the highway, and now the parachutists apparently prepared for battle. The neighboring company, judging by the fierce firefight, had already entered the battle. Vasil Seroshin got a German automatic rifle. I asked from whom he received such a gift. It turns out that he, Lysov, and Brashenko, sneaking through the undergrowth, crawled to the German post, located slightly ahead of the defense line. While the parachutists were listening to the noise raised by Lysov and Brashenko, Seroshin crawled stealthily along a shallow groove and was behind the Germans. What happened next was a matter of minutes. As Seroshin put it, he took away their weapons so that they would not dabble. 2 machine guns can cause quite a commotion if you act from inside the enemy ring. It was necessary to take advantage of the gap penetrated by scouts before it was not discovered by the Nazis. Having estimated how much time it will take, I send a liaison to Stolnikov with the order to raise the company in the attack in 40 minutes. The group, led by Seroshin, safely reached the gap. Over the groove stick out boots with erased horseshoes, the feet of a dead parachutist. The sergeant snackily slipped into the groove. We crawled after him. The languid minutes dragged on. We lurked in the bushes, fearing that we would be discovered prematurely. It is not difficult to imagine how it threatened us. But the restless Sirostan could not stay still. Before I knew it, he was gone. He came back as silently as he had crawled away. According to him, there was a temporary ammunition depot in 3 forest pits ahead of us, guarded by sentries. For such pleasant news, I forgave him the amateur reconnaissance. To our good fortune, a non-commissioned officer, who had been skirting the location of the paratroopers, discovered the dead ingots too late. Hardly had he time to raise the alarm before Stolnikov launched an attack. The fascists opened a desperate shooting. Taking advantage of the firefight, we rushed to the warehouse. Deep overgrown pits, filled with boxes of ammunition and grenades, turned out to be excellent natural shelters. In addition, our armament was replenished with automatic rifles, removed from the dead sentries and non-commissioned officers. Now we must try to deprive the Nazis of their fire rations. Soon the ammunition carriers rushed to the warehouse and ran into bullets. Having found out that the ammunition depot it captured, the parachutists concentrated machine gun and machine gun fire against us. They wouldn't let us stick our heads out. We had to take grenades. The parachutists lay down. They probably didn't realize we were only a handful. Their nerves gave out. They began to retreat deep into the forest, from where came barking, as Stolnikov aptly noted, the cues of German machine gun. Hiding behind the trees, we pursued the retreating and face-to-face with the soldiers of his company, ahead of whom ran Stolnikov with a rifle. Seeing me, he raises his rifle up and shouts triumphant, "Victory! The fascists are fleeing." I instructed some soldiers to collect all the rifles from the dead and seize the ammunition found, and ordered the rest to continue the pursuit. However, a swarm of bursting bullets, which caused an incredible rattle in the forest, forced us to stop and take cover behind reliable tree trunks. Having chosen a rather dry place between the thick roots of a mighty pine tree towering high above the ground, covered with fallen dried needles, I invite Stolnikov and platoon commanders to consult and clarify the plan of further actions. Suddenly appears Combat Gryazev's, accompanied by Lieutenant Kalinin and a group of soldiers. Running from tree to tree, he jumps to land next to me. Droplets of sweat glisten in the sparse ripples on Gryazev's face. His eyes sparkle. The senior lieutenant breathes heavily. "Report the situation, Lieutenant." Having heard how we managed to defeat the entrenched parachutists, Gryazev asked, "How many destroyed fascists?" I didn't count, Comrade Combat. I grinned. There was no time, but we killed no less than 25 pieces. The word pieces caused a merry grin on Gryazev's lips. And how many pieces were taken prisoner? Not a single fascist infestation was caught, I answered in tone. They fought back like sinners when the devils dragged them to the frying pan. Well, to hell with them, with prisoners. Gryazev waved his hand. Mat was here. Take people away from their work. For me, a fascist is good only if he's dead. What are you going to do now? Are you going to sit under a pine tree? No, Comrade Combat, I calmly objected, now with the platoon commanders to understand the situation and clarify the future plan. I think there is no need to go straight ahead. Well, sort it out and I'll listen. Gryazev pulled out of his breast pocket crumpled pack of Belomor, nervously smoked. From the reports of the platoon commanders, it became clear to me that the surviving parachutists retreated to a sandy hill, on which stands several mighty pine trees. Hiding behind their trunks, they took a circular defense. The place around the hill is open, every meter under dense machine gun and machine gun fire. What to do? Attack immediately. But without the support of artillery and mortars, we will suffer heavy losses. What to do? So what decision is overdue at the company commander? Interrupted my thoughts, the commander. Remembering how facilitated our attack blow from the rear, I resolutely declared, swim fascists from the front by the forces of the 1st platoon. The rest of the platoons will carry out a bypass maneuver to then simultaneously attack from both sides. I think that if our fighters open fire from the other side, where the parachutists, in all probability, intend to retreat at night, they will scurry away. In the daylight hours, I think, they will not dare to leave the place where they are. Well, agreed Gryazev. The idea is correct. There is no sense in rushing under bullets unnecessarily. Try to cut off the parachutists the way to retreat, which will immediately affect their resilience. I approve. Proceed with the maneuver. Just keep in mind that 2 kilometers east of this pockets of resistance at the height of Kruglia entrenched the rest of the enemy forces. Our companies twice attacked the height from the south and west sides. in order to block the way parachutists to the front line, but because of the heavy fire had to abandon the continuation of attacks, otherwise a lot of people lost. I decided to restrain the enemy by fire, and with the onset of darkness to strike. Night attack is a difficult thing, so now there are careful preparations. Hurry up and finish here and join us. If the attack fails, call it off and prepare to rush up the hill under the cover of darkness. Is that clear? All right, I'm out of here. With success, the commander left, and we discussed in detail and agreed on a plan of action. Calculating the time needed to implement a bypass maneuver, we agreed to resume the fight in an hour and a half. Kalin's platoon should be the first to start, and when he would attract the enemy's attention, Valishnikov's and Papchenko's men should break through to the height without excessive noise. At the agreed hour, Kalin's platoon, with a wide front under cover of machine gun fire, moved to the sand hill. Kalinin and his men, rapidly running over, shouted commands: company, forward, faster, prepare to attack. In short, they tried to create the impression that large forces were advancing against the paratroopers entrenched on the hill. The success of the demonstration was facilitated by the small bushes which were close to the hill. The Nazis only heard the noise and shooting, and saw no one. However, the shooting also had an effect. Sparing no bullets, the parachutists opened fire on the shrubbery. It was so dense that it forced us to crouch down to the ground and shout commands lying down. And on the other side of the hill there was silence. I began to worry, believing that Valishnikov and Papchenko were too late and the planned attack was thwarted, as suddenly on the hill rose shooting, and to us bullets began to fly less and less often. Valishnikov and Papchenko already broken through. This thought threw me up from the ground, and with a cry of forward, to the attack, I rushed toward the hill. Having jumped out together with Kalinin to the top of the hill, we stopped with astonishment. Neither our parachutists nor our soldiers were there, though hastily dug trenches and not yet cooled shell casings testified that the parachutists had just hidden behind the trunks of huge pine trees. Furious shooting and shouting could be heard in the swampy, shallow woods. We hurried there and soon ran into our fighters. Seeing Valeshnikov, to whom a fighter was bandaging his arm above the elbow, I fell down beside him. Branches, knocked down by bullets, fell on my head. Why did we miss the fascists? Holding back, glumly asked me. We didn't have time. Valeshnikov answered guiltily. Hush, you bear, he said, throwing an angry look at the fighter, who tightened the ends of the bandage. Such comradey, cunning WU turned out to be. We went around the hill and began to quietly ascend. And they, don't be fools, put out an armed guard in all directions. We ran into him. While we were messing around with the guards, the parachutists ran down the hill. We followed them, and they ran into machine gun fire, apparently, ran into the defense of their second squad and lay down. Now they found themselves between two fires. The battalion, as it seems, could not surround the height in a tight ring, added Stolnikov, who came up. There were only sentries from here. They were hit by the retreating fascists. One sentry was killed, another was seriously wounded. We bandaged him up and will take him to the medical center at the first opportunity. I decided to talk to the wounded, to clarify the available information. From the conversation I realized that the commander did not change the decision to storm the height with the onset of darkness. In order not to disperse forces, he concentrated both companies on the western and southern slopes of the height. Having sent the wounded to the infirmary, we went to the 3rd platoon. Platoon Commander Papchenko, lying behind a fallen tree, fired bullet after bullet at the enemy and habitually said in recitative, Ridnabat Kivshina, the decision has been made. Forward to the attack on the hated enemy. That's right, Comrade Papchenko, EEI confirmed. But we will start the attack when it gets dark, simultaneously with the rest of the companies. How many casualties? 1 killed, 2 wounded, reported Papchenko. We withdrew to a safe place, called Kalinin and Valeshnikov, and discussed the plan for a night attack. And what if the parachutists will try now, without waiting for darkness, to join their own? I suddenly thought, can we not take advantage of this and on their shoulders to break into the heights? I shared my thoughts with the platoon members. They warmly grasped the idea. Having clarified the task of each of them, I sent Serushtan to the commander with a report on the decision. On command, the soldiers cautiously, under the cover of machine guns, began to approach the parachutists, gradually pushing them back to the height. Unable to withstand the pressure, the parachutists rushed up through the small bushes. The Nazis, who had gained a foothold on the height, opened hurricane fire on them. The parachutists lay down and shouted in unison, "Nicht schiss! Nicht schiss!" Imitating the Germans, shouted Maiten, followed by other soldiers. In the continuous crackle of machine guns and automatic weapons, it was difficult to distinguish who was begging not to shoot. At any rate, the fire subsided for a while. Their retreating men had risen to their height and were trying with their last effort to run to their own, and we are following them through the bushes. With friendly throws of grenades, the soldiers do not give the Germans a second thought. I burst into the trenches. A fierce close combat breaks out. As we expected, the company covered the high. Kalinin's platoon moved forward, and Valeshnikov and Papchenko turned by a ledge to the right and left. The parachutists dug a lot of trenches on the height, and everywhere we could see old overgrown pits. Both our fighters and fascists were in these trenches and pits almost side by side and were engaged in a fierce firefight. With grenades we managed to drive the Germans out of the trenches and pits. What to do next? Troubled thought. If we continue to go deeper, we will be in the enemy ring. It is difficult to hold on the height until darkness. The fascists will try to knock us out. No sooner had Stolnikov and I exchanged our opinions than parachutists came to attack us from all sides. It's as if we were in an ant heap. Stolnikov grinned. Good and evilly and shouted, "Stukov, tell Kalinins not a step back, hold on to the last. We were not allowed to cut him off." About 24 fascists managed to break through to the trenches where Valeshnikov's men were huddled. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. Stolnikov, throwing a desperate look at me, ran to the place of the fight. I hurried after him, along with the mortars, who were always in my vicinity and served as a control section. With a move, we fell on the heads of the fighting men. Stolnikov jumped on the shoulders of a burly fascist who was trying to reach the throat of Lieutenant Valeshnikov. I rushed to the aid of Sergeant Romanov. Valeshnikov's platoon would have been threatened with death if a dozen more fascists had come here. Fortunately, the parachutists were no longer interested in I. On the southern and western slopes of the height, fierce firing began. Shouts of hurrah were heard. They cheered us up and caused confusion in the ranks of the enemy. He scrambled about, looking for a way of retreat. The thick bushes helped him to camouflage and retreat. In an effort not to miss the paratroopers, I gave the command to pursue them relentlessly. Wading through the bushes, I unexpectedly ran into Lieutenant Voronov. We hugged for joy then, having consulted, turned our men to the east, where, judging by the firefight, the surviving paratroopers were retreating. On the eastern slopes of the heights, we met the commander and commissar of the battalion, who put the task to the commander of the 2nd Company, Samailov. Seeing us, Senior Lieutenant Gryazev shouted, "Hurry up to me. Let's clarify the tasks." When we ran up, Gryazev showed on the map highway running between the railroad and Minsk Highway. Drive the parachutists to the highway. Our armored cars are running there. The fascists can't get through. The 2nd Company is cutting them off from the south. You, Voronov, must outflank them from the north, not to let them break through the Minsk Highway. You, Altunin, should deploy the company and a wide front to comb the forest, smoking out the parachutists. Indicating the dividing lines between the companies, the commander asked, "The task is clear." "Clear." In one voice we answered and hurried to their companies. To go around all the platoons and clarify the tasks would take a lot of time, and I was glad that I have at hand my mortars. Having explained the essence of the new task, I sent Senior Sergeant Polivoda and Sergeant Vostrykov to Valeshnikov and Papchenko, and decided to catch up with Lieutenant Kalinin and further follow his platoon. On this day, I was convinced in practice that to lead the battle in the forest is extremely difficult. It is necessary not to lose contact with the companies, otherwise you can unexpectedly collide and shoot each other. You can note that the platoons are mixed up, and that the enemy slipped through the constantly formed between them gaps. So all my control section in a continuous run. I wish I could get the radios, but this is an impossible dream. The battle gradually turns into scattered skirmishes. I continue to move with Kalinin's platoon. Behind the bushes glimpse wary faces Brashenko, Lysov, Siroshtin, Shlevko and other soldiers of the former mortar company. Misha Stogov is always trying to get ahead of me, scrutinizing the thick shrubbery. Having come out on the beaten path, we speed up the step, and suddenly 10 meters ahead, where my orderly was walking, an explosion, the echo of which is far spread throughout the forest. Stogov shrieked and fell. I run up to him and shudder when I see a bloody mess instead of a foot. Misha moans desperately. I stooped down beside him, pulling a bandage bag out of my field bag. Not knowing how to treat such a wound, I ordered to immediately look for Petrenko. And he's already running. Having thrown down on the way bag with medicines, takes out scissors and cuts off the remains of the boot. Having entrusted Stogov to the care of the medical officer, I catch up with the platoon, looking under my feet, treating scatter anti-personnel mines. I warn the platoon commanders about it. Not even 10 minutes pass, as I almost suffered the fate of my orderly. I put my foot down and suddenly notice a freshly broken pine branch. I make a desperate leap to the side. Under the branch I find a saucer-shaped object. Although I had never seen a German mine before, it was not difficult to guess what it was. Feverishly, I remembered everything that we were taught in the lessons of sapper business. I put my automatic rifle on the ground and, pulling out a penknife, I cautiously examined the ground to see if there was a wire stretching from the mine. After making sure that the mine was laid on the ground in a hurry, I pick it up. I want to keep the mine to study at leisure, and then to familiarize the soldiers and company commanders with its device. Although a little combat experience suggests that people should be able to handle such guests. In the battle to look for sappers, no time. There is no time to neutralize the mine. I pass it to Lysov and ask him to save it. Despite the warning, 2 more fighters blew up and 4 died when they ran into an ambush. Therefore, we are advancing with increased caution. Ahead, behind the trees, opened a small forest clearing, the opposite side of which was overgrown with thick bushes. Siroshin and Brashenko accelerate their steps to quickly overcome the open space. Suddenly, Siroshin fell on the grass and froze. Brashenko follows his example, so they have noticed something. I rush with the rest of the fighters to bypass the clearing. The parachutists' nerves failed. They opened fire, but we had already flanked them. Afraid to be cut off, the fascists, shooting back, retreat. Fighters pursue them. For several hours, we have been chasing the parachutists through the forest, smoking them out of the forest. From fatigue, we can hardly move. Kalinin's platoon has thinned out. Okremenko with his supplies is lost somewhere. My reserve group stumbled upon a forest hamlet. There was nobody in the house or in the barn. Having seen a shallow well, we drink cold water with pleasure. Out of inexperience, I did not think to check if the well was poisoned. Fedya, having found an empty bottle in the hut, filled it and put it in a duffel bag. And the soldiers sat down on the grass. Suddenly, Fedya, clutching my shoulder, pointed to the potato field that separated the hut from the forest. 12 paratroopers were hurriedly walking across it, not lurking. Apparently, thirst drove them out of the forest. They obviously do not notice us. Silently, I crawled behind the hut. The others followed me. Having taken convenient positions, we prepared to meet the guests. Stepan Polyvoda and Fyodor Brashenko climbed into the attic of the hut, and now they have the well in the palm of their hands. The parachutists, forgetting about caution, rushed to the well. When the water splashed in the bucket placed on the ground, the parachutists dropped their automatic rifles and began to scoop water with cauldrons. They are so engrossed that they do not notice anything. My command Hende Hoksh heard only the non-commissioned officer. He desperately shrieked and raised his machine gun, but it was too late. My line threw him. The paratroopers, grabbing their weapons, were instantly mowed down by the cues from the attic window. The others obediently raised their hands. Fedya, businesslike sniffing, quickly collects automatic rifles. There was no time for fiddling with the prisoners. Surrounded by captured young, strong soldiers, we stand at a loss, not knowing what to do with them. As if understanding my concern, Brashenko brought a hemp rope from the shed. "May Terry twist the Germans?" he asked. I liked the suggestion. They lined up the parachutists in a column 1 by 1. Mitin ordered them to fold their hands at the waist. Brashenko tightly tied their hands and, passing the end of the rope to me, proud of his reading, explained. This is the way they used to drive Negroes to sell. I saw it in a picture in Uncle Tom's cabin. Noticing that weak Susik could hardly stand on his feet from fatigue, I decided to give him a break. I beckoned Kolma to me and put the rope in his childish hands. Come on, Homer, drive this figure 8 to the highway. Kolma stares dazedly at the burly bandits. Then, at the end of the rope with which they are tied, blinks his whitish eyelashes, and rivulets of sweat roll down his flushed cheeks. He is so frightened that I hasten to... And accompanying you will be Comrade Mitin Tian Tildik. Homer joyfully looks at Mitin, and he confidently commands. Vorwärts, Soldaten. Parachutists rushed like stale fattened horses and dragged Susik behind them. Homer, afraid to let go of the rope, jumped after them, holding the telephone set. All with a kind smile saw off the hilarious figure of the escort. Having caught up with the column, Maitin went to the side, holding a machine gun at the ready. With parachutists are becoming less and less frequent. Together with Stolnikov and Kalinin, without fear we go to a large clearing overgrown with tall grass. If only there were mowers in brightly coloured shirts on this grassy area. A dilapidated barn, probably intended for hay storage, stands on the far side of the meadow. I bring binoculars to my eyes to examine the clearing, and near the barn I clearly distinguish the heated, sweaty faces of the Germans. They are feverishly setting fire to the large piles of straw piled up near the hollow walls of the barn. The dry straw flares up like gunpowder, and in an instant the structure is engulfed in flames. A frightening thought flashes. What if there are Red Army prisoners or locals there? It is impossible to delay. Having shouted something in rage and having slashed from the automatic rifle at the fleeing Germans, I rushed to the barn. The Germans lay down in the grass, shooting back. Stolnikov, having decided to cut off their escape route, runs with the soldiers along the opposite side of the clearing. The parachutists, frightened that they are about to be surrounded, jump up and hide in the bushes. They are pursued by the whole Kalinin's platoon. Stolnikov and I, accompanied by the orderly, Fedi and Brezhenko, rushed to the barn, from where we could hear the cries of the terrified people. When we ran up, we were stunned. From the gate of the barn covered with fire, crawling, climbing, wounded parachutists. Petrenko, who was used to help the wounded at the risk of his life, was shocked by this picture. He continues, "Beasts? What beasts? They burn their own wounded. Forgetting that we are enemies, we run into the smoke-filled shed, grab helpless, gasping people and drag them to the exit. The mighty Fedya drags two of them at once. Noticing that the roof is about to collapse, I forcefully push Petrenko, trying once again to jump into the blazing inferno. The instructor's eyebrows are scorched, there are burns on his face, his uniform is burnt in many places. Suddenly a blood-black column of smoke and flame soared to the sky, and a cloud of sparks erupted from the open gate. The roof collapsed. We look at the 11 wounded men we have rescued. They have got themselves taken care of. Stolnikov exclaims, "Oosh! How could I have thought that at the risk of my life I would rush to save the enemy? What an accident! We must, Commander, inform the headquarters, send a car for them." The wounded licking their lips, moaning pitifully. Wasser, bitte Wasser. It's a familiar word from the school hole. After hesitating, I order Fede to give the wounded stashed water bottle and guard them. We ourselves continue to chase the parachutists. Only before evening we finally manage to knock them out on the road leading from the railway station to the highway, squeezed from all sides. Having shot the last ammunition, the parachutists surrendered. I watched with amazement as the deadly tired fighters, having collected the weapons abandoned by the surrendered men, surrounded no less tired parachutists, sturdy, tall guys. The opposing sides stare at each other point blank. Our fighters and commanders, smoking mahorka and cigarettes, look at the faces of the prisoners, as if trying to find something that would sharply distinguish the fascist soldiers from other people, and they did not see much difference. If it were not for the uniform, it would be impossible to determine where the Germans are and where the Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians. Only the expression of eyes was different. The eyes of the victors shone with curiosity, in them satisfaction and good-naturedness, typical of a hard-working, well-done man. In the eyes of the prisoners there was fear. They apparently expected that the Russians, dirty and tired in pursuit of them, would pounce on them and tear them to pieces. What was their surprise when, having looked at the prisoners, the fighters began to treat them with makhorka. The first to do so was a small red-haired fighter. Stretching his juicy lips in a good-natured smile, he approached the youngest prisoner and, poking his finger into his chest, asked, "Who are you?" "Yechveste Nich." The prisoner shook his head. I, the red-haired man, poked himself in the chest. "I'm a collective farmer, and you." Seeing that the prisoner was staring at the red-haired soldier with an incomprehensible look, the returning Maitin translated. "Nizer soldat is debau air, were sind." "Oh," the prisoner perked up. "Ich bin student." When Maitin translated, the red-haired man respectfully stretched out. "Look at you, a student literate then, not some dark, whipped peasant." After thinking about it, he asked Maitin, Ask him what his name is and why did he join the fascists. Mitin asked the question, and having received an answer, said, he says that his name is Friedrich, that he does not consider himself a fascist. Wow, tell him, brother, that they are all fascists since they went to war against the workers and peasants' state. He's unconscious, but nothing. We'll clear his head. He'll realize his mistake. Good-naturedly looking at the prisoner, the fighter took out a pouch, pulled out a pack of tissue paper and, tearing off a leaf, rolled a cigar, smoked it and, holding it out to the prisoner, offered, "Here, German, try our Tambov samosad." The prisoner incredulously accepted the cigarette and cautiously turned it in his hands. Was there a trick? The young, broad-shouldered Red Army soldier, glancing angrily at the red-haired man, threw, "Why are you wasting your precious faggots on a fascist, uncle? Put lead in his mouth, you bastard." First of all, he is not a fascist, but a student. And secondly, you should give lead to your enemies in a fair fight. You don't wave your fists after a fight. Noting a cigarette from Friedrich's hands, he smoked it, and returning it, smiled encouragingly. Try Russian tobacco. There is no such thing in Germany." As the prisoner greedily took 2 puffs and coughed so much that tears came out. Nothing, laughed the red-eyed man good-naturedly. "You will get used to our tobacco. You will realize that everything in Russia is strong, both people and tobacco." The strict formation of the prisoners was broken. Realizing that they were not going to be killed, they squared their shoulders and willingly entered into conversation, which was conducted, as Stolnikov put it, in the Neanderthal way. However, I noticed that some of the prisoners could hardly hide their beastly hatred for us, tried to turn away or hide behind the backs of their comrades in arms. The unexpected command, "Stand up," instantly leveled the ranks of the prisoners. Under escort they marched to the station, and the victors went to the rolling camp kitchens. After dinner, Gryazev built a battalion. Colonel, who led the liquidation of the paratroopers thrown in the area, solemnly announced, "Mertiant Samades fighters and commanders, on behalf of the commander of the group of troops, Major General Komrad Rokossovsky, I declare you a commendation for the exemplary performance of the operation to eliminate the paratroopers." For a few moments the soldiers were silent. Then they realized and, following the commanders, shouted unfriendly, "We serve the Soviet Union." Now I congratulate you, comrades, and wish you to crush the fascists with the same persistence as today. Senior Lieutenant Gryazev shouted hurrah. The commander's commendation testified that the first battle, which the battalion conducted in difficult conditions, and with an extremely experienced enemy, showed its ability to fulfill combat tasks. The battalion had gotten a lot of German machine guns. However, the colonel, to our dismay, ordered us to keep 5 machine guns for each company, the rest to be given to him. A sleepless night, a prolonged fight with the landing force knocked the soldiers off their feet. Rolling out overcoats, they instantly forgot in a heavy sleep. Many shrieked, apparently reliving the vicissitudes of the forest battle. The commanders are worrying about the wounded, about food and ammunition. I can't sleep. I think about tomorrow, about the future. I remembered about the mine, which I almost stepped on, and told Lysov to bring it. He carried it in his outstretched hand, cautiously looking under his feet. He carefully placed the black deadly saucers on my palm, and, sitting down beside me, sighed with relief. "What a plague. You're afraid to breathe on it. You might lose a hand or even your head." I didn't rest for a minute. I kept guarding her, damnable, as if someone had not stepped on her by accident. Before I could examine the mine properly, I heard Lysov snoring loudly. Trying not to disturb him, I carefully got up and carried the dangerous find to the commander. He twirls it in his hands for a long time, then orders to call the commander of the 1st platoon of the 3rd company. Tame, a small, height, white-haired lieutenant. Combat silently handed him a mine. Having turned the metal saucer in his hands, the lieutenant took out a paint knife and in a minute gave the commander the fuse, carelessly throwing the now safe casing on the ground. The combat asked, slowly repeating the operation. The lieutenant leisurely inserts the fuse and twists it out again. Combat, furrowing his brow, does the same, and holds out the mine to me. Having diffused it, I feel an unbearable desire to smoke. Meanwhile, the commander gathered all the unit commanders and ordered the lieutenant to teach them how to handle an anti-personnel mine. I returned to the company with the idea at the first opportunity to pass the acquired experience to my subordinates. The silence of the night is broken by the rich man's snoring and inarticulate muttering of the sleepers. Near a lonely birch tree, I hear someone softly reciting poetry. Unforgettable Pushkin's lines come from the darkness. And the battle broke out, the Poltava battle. In the fire, under the hail of the fiery fire, the wall of the living reflected above the fallen line, the fresh formation closes bayonets, as heavy clouds of flying cavalry squads, rain, sabres sounding, making mistakes, fighting shoulder to shoulder. It's Papchenko. His muffled velvety baritone sounded especially soulful in the night. Suddenly it rang solemnly, with fierce verse. But the moment of victory is near. Hurrah, we are breaking. The Swedes are bending. Oh, glorious hour! Oh, glorious sight! More pressure, and the enemy flees. And the cavalry followed. Swords are dulled by murder, and the whole steppe is covered with the fallen, like a swarm of black locusts. He is silent, and the listeners continue to sit. The prolonged pause is interrupted by Silkenko. Gerpi and comrade senior lieutenant, Bigentel Gaida Makiv. Sleep, sleep, guys. Papchenko waved his hands. After all, tomorrow is the battle. That's right. Comrade Senior Lieutenant, tomorrow, or rather already today, we will have a difficult battle. We must rest. Papchenko sharply turns to me, and coming close to me with unexpected longing quietly, almost in a whisper, says, I can't sleep, comrade Comrade. When you think that in a few hours blood will flow again we will bury our comrades, and so every day when you think about it you don't want to live. I'm a peaceful man. I taught the boys the beauty of words, the music of poetry, and now I'm teaching them how to kill better and more. To kill? Is it our fault? I object. I too would like to work in peace. But they don't give us such an opportunity. They used to hinder our fathers. They were attacking Soviet Russia from all sides. Now they don't have enough slaves, they don't have enough living space. Therefore, we have no choice. We must destroy fascist filth in the name of freedom and happiness of our loved ones, in the name of the future of our homeland. Yes, me, confirmed Papchenko. No matter how hard it is to take a man's life, we have to. I console myself with the fact that the fascists are not people, they are rabid beasts. And yet, when my soul is troubled, I calm myself with poems. I choose authors according to my mood. I read poems by the great Taras when my heart yearns for my native Ukraine. Pushkin puts me in a solemn, combative mood. Mayakovsky awakens anger to everything vulgar and vile on earth here. In parting with Papchenko, I wish him a good rest before new trials. Fedya returned in the middle of the night and reported that he had escorted all the wounded parachutists to the rear. From the interrogation of the prisoners, it became known that only half of them were saved from the fire. Tudien said that parachutists had the law to destroy wounded if it was impossible to take them to the rear. The parachutists were intimidated by the tortures to which the Russians would allegedly subject them if they were captured. In the morning, the battalion was again raised on alarm, and again the cars are rushing along the highway, and the pre-dawn chill lingers on the sleepy faces of the soldiers. More and more clearly comes the artillery cannonade. Somewhere beyond the horizon and in the west grows a dim glow of fire. There is no doubt we are approaching the front line. The tactical aviation of the fascists has not yet begun to plunder, and we are advancing unhindered towards the unknown. At dawn, the column turned off the highway, and soon the battalion was dropped off at the edge of a large grove. Ahead loomed the wooden houses of the town, in which numerous fires were burning and a firefight could be heard, now fading and then rekindling. In the east, the first rays of the sun had barely broken through the treetops when two black MKs rolled up to the headquarters car. From the first, almost on the move, jumped out of a taut, lean colonel with a Soviet automatic rifle on his shoulder. Combat leisurely approached him, introduced himself. I am the commander of the 38th Infantry Division, called himself arrived. Vega Battalion comes at my disposal. You will receive your task from Colonel Meshkov. He nodded at the heavy elderly colonel who arrived in the second car. He will familiarize you with the situation. Familiarized with the number, weapons, and the state of the battalion, the division commander left, and Colonel Meshkov ordered to call him all the commanders of units. Maths, comrades, commanders, he addressed us. In the area of Smolensk was extremely difficult situation. Motorized and tank units of the enemy on July 16 broke into Smolensk. Following this, north of Smolensk, tank and motorized units of another fascist group broke through from the town of Demidov to the town of Yartsevo and joined the large airborne landing force thrown here. Trying to dislodge the enemy from Smolensk, parts of the 129th Infantry Division and a regiment of our 38th Division fought fierce battles in the northern part of the city for several days. Tank and motorized units of Goths and Guderian managed to connect east of Smolensk and cut off our units fighting for Smolensk. Yesterday, the enemy forced the River Von and broke into the eastern outskirts of Yartsev. By decisive attack in the evening, he was thrown back to the right bank of the river. All night long, the battle continued to eliminate separate enemy groups that were entrenched in stone houses. Parts of our division, reinforced by battalions of Moscow militiamen and your battalion, will have to force the River Vop and defeat the opposing forces of the enemy. I will announce the task of the battalion and its neighbours in Yartsevo, and now you, the commander, should, if possible, secretly lead the battalion to the left bank of the river in the area of the textile factory, Woo-Yen, to the place where the factory chimney stands. He showed the city. Having appointed to the commander the hour of meeting, Meshkov left, and we led the companies in the specified direction. At noon, the battalion took the initial line for the offensive, which passed through the territory of the factory. In one of the workshops, Stolnikov and I came across huge drums with patterned silk. Army soldiers were busy tearing off large pieces, and having taken off their boots or shoes, were winding the silk around their swollen feet instead of the rotten, dirty shoelaces. How much of the people's good is wasted? Stolnikov waved his hand in annoyance. We should take it under guard. It is necessary, of course. It is necessary. I mentally agree. But is it possible to protect this good in a situation when the city is changing hands? The Red Army will go on the offensive, and again there will be no one to guard the produce. On that day the offensive never began, the enemy having noticed, apparently, the revival on the left bank of the river. In the afternoon opened such a hurricane fire from mortars and guns that people could not stick their noses out of the shelters. As soon as the shelling subsided, preparations for the attack resumed. Colonel Meshkov, with the commanders of the militia battalions and our commander, for a long time practiced on the map and on the ground the order of attack. Turning in the evening to the battalion, Gryazev announced that the attack would begin at dawn. Covertly leading company commanders to the bank of the Vop River, he clarified the tasks on the ground and showed the direction of the attack of the battalion and its neighbours. We were to cooperate with battalions of Moscow militia to force the river, attack the enemy, entrenched in the area of the railway station, and by the end of the day to reach the Pesonyaya River. The battalion commander reported that in the main direction along the highway Vyazma, Yartsevo advancing parts of the 38th Infantry Division. Showing Voronov the direction of the attack of his company, Gryazev warned that after the capture of the railroad crossing, he and the 1st Battalion of Militia prevented the approach of enemy reserves from the north. I look at Sergei with surprise. He has visibly changed. Usually reserved and imperturbable, today he looks lively and smiling. He listens to the commander's instructions with emphasized attention, often asks questions, expresses his opinion. It is felt that his new assignment has cheered him up. And the 2nd Company of Lieutenant Samoilov, Commander Gryazev, ordered to attack directly on the railroad station. To the left of us was to act the 2nd Battalion of Militiamen. Finishing reconnaissance, Gryazev warned that the attack should be rapid, otherwise the enemy will have time to take away the accumulated trains at the station. He warned that before the beginning of the offensive it was necessary to build assault bridges across the Vop, and during the artillery preparation to transfer companies to the right bank. While it was light, the soldiers tried to find a quieter place to write to their relatives. After leaving the school, I sent home only one letter, in which I promised to come in July on leave. But July is already over, and I spend it not at all as I dreamed. I wanted to share a lot of things with my family, but how could I write about everything? When the heart longs for loved ones, it, as if on a photograph, imprints their images, especially when you close your eyes, draws one picture after another. I can clearly see the only horseshoe-shaped street of my native Siberian village, with the wonderful name of Steklyanka. On both sides of the street, squat, mostly adobe houses with adjoining outbuildings are lined up in rows. Our family lives in one of these houses. We built the house ourselves. Before the creation of the collective farm, there was often not enough bread for the new harvest, so we had to eat what we could. That's why I always sympathized with those who had it even worse. One day a woman with 2 boys my age and an old woman who had been burned to death wandered into the house, ragged, dirty, and so hungry that when they saw a piece of bread, they did not take their eyes off it. I felt sorry for them. She hid the closet and collected everything I could find to eat. A slice of stale bread, a dozen eggs, a pot of boiled potatoes, a piece of lard. I gave it all to the old woman. She did not dare to take it, and the girl looked at the food and roared. Finally, the old woman put the supplies in a canvas bag, turned to the icon and, crossing herself, whispered, "Mother of God, do not spare for him your mercy, as he did not spare for us our daily bread. Preserve him and help him in his hour of need." In the evening, my parents and elder brother came back from the field, and we were going to have dinner. After listening to my incomprehensible speech about the need to help the starving, my father sighed heavily, went out into the yard and began to roll a cigar. Brother Mikhail, passing by, slapped me in the back and chuckled. Oh, you, help for the hungry. You'll lose your pants. What a teacher. You better go and meet the cow. My mother swung her towel at Mikhail. You hear the herd is being driven away. And she smiled encouragingly at me. Nothing, she said, will survive. I wanted to rush to her, but boyish shyness held me back, and I only glanced gratefully in her direction. One memory evokes another. I vividly imagined the village street in the pre-dawn hour, bleats and mooing cattle, which the shepherd drives from the pasture, vocal echoing kids, helping to drive it to the yards, returning from the field adults. And here comes the mother, Irina Andreevna, rattling the milking can coming out of the house. Her not old, wrinkled, beautiful and kind face is preoccupied. I can clearly see the pensive face of my grey-eyed, not by years serious 16-year-old sister Mashenka, who treated her brothers patronizingly. She made sure they looked tidy. The older brother, Mikhail, was forced to shave regularly. Where is he now? On what front? Is he alive? My father, Terentij Dmitrievich, a 48-year-old wiry man, for some reason I always imagine him riding a horse. A passionate lover of these clever animals, he worked all his life as a stable boy in the collective farm. He was proud of his knowledge of horses. He would pick the most dead-looking horse at the fair, drag it to the yard under the mocking looks of neighbours, and then nurse it like a child. But what pride shone in his eyes when he rode down the street on a beautiful horse, transformed as if in a fairy tale. Hello, going into details. I begin the letter. Hello, dear father, mother, and little sister. I sparingly inform you that I'm at the front, that I am alive and well, that I have not yet had a chance to participate in serious battles. In short, like all frontline soldiers, I tried not to worry my relatives. They already live in fear of receiving a funeral. In the evening, Stolnikov, calling me aside, anxiously said, "In the company spread a rumor that in Smolensk surrounded the main forces of the front, that as soon as the Nazis finished with them, they will pile on us. Therefore, to attack, they say, in such an environment, means to accelerate their death. Someone is cleverly spreading rumors. There is no time to identify the spreaders. We need to talk to them. Let's gather the company." Stolnikov, as always, speaks passionately and frankly. Only a hidden enemy can spread false information to undermine our faith in victory. Instead of resolutely suppressing rumors and arresting their peddlers, you, fellow soldiers, pass them to each other and unwittingly become accomplices of the enemy. We must bear in mind that the enemy is cunning, experienced in deception and in spreading false rumors. We must take all this into account and not give in to provocations. It is necessary to immediately bring to the court-martial all those who by their panic and cowardice hinder the cause of defense. Having thrown a quick glance around the audience, Stolnikov continues. I want to read you the lines of the national poet of Kazakhstan. Shall I compare them, dashing villains, to a dog? A dog, howling, will recoil from them. Shall we compare them to a snake, the traitors of evil? The snake, hissing, will deny them, to curse their deeds and their false speech, to strip them, monsters, of their human names. Calming down, the politruk nods in my direction. Here the commander will tell in detail about the true situation at the front, and you'll see that the rumor mongers are worse than the fascists. They do harm stealthily. As calmly as possible, I tell you about the situation on the Smolensk direction. I do not hide that the enemy units managed to break through to the rear of the Smolensk grouping of our troops, but the Germans themselves were between hammer and anvil. The anvil is our units fighting in Smolensk, and the hammer is the Yartsev group of troops, which includes our battalion. The comparison apparently lights the listeners. Their faces cheer up. I emphasize that the passive are always beaten. Therefore, to defeat the fascist units that came to the rear of our Smolensk divisions, we need to fight the enemy with redoubled activity and fury. After the meeting, excited Red Army soldiers dragged to Stolnikov's stubborn fighter. Holding him by the shoulders, a tall Red Army soldier in a helmet indignantly said, "That's him, our main informer. He runs somewhere and then whispers in his ear the information, as if received from a faithful friend from the headquarters." "In what headquarters do you have a faithful friend who provides you with accurate information?" Stolnikov angrily asks the pale Red Army soldier. "Don't believe them." The chatterer said fearfully. "I did not spread false rumors. I sometimes retold facts that my old friend shared with me." "Where is this friend?" Stolnikov insists. After a long evasion and locking up, the Red Army soldier calls the name of a soldier from the 3rd Company. It turned out that they had known each other for only a few days. The documents of the old friend seemed suspicious, and he was sent to the division headquarters to find out his identity. Taking advantage of the fact that almost the entire company was in the company, Stolnikov offered Patrick Lysov to read the recently published decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USA on the introduction of the institution of military commissars. After reading the decree, Lysov outlined the content of the regulations on military commissars of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army and briefly described its importance. "Allow me," Martin concluded Stolnikov, to finish the conversation with the words of our army poet Shemoneyev, who characterized the role of military commissars in the following way. "In the smoke of battles, in the blaze of fires, the soldiers will see, once again in front of them, the familiar face, the glorious commissars, with iron will, with a fiery soul. In a dangerous hour, in a stormy hour, they'll find the words. They'll find the words that call, for the motherland, for the motherland, for Stalin. They'll lead to victory. Soldiers and commanders cannot calm down for a long time. Everyone is excited about the upcoming offensive. After all, this will be the first offensive in which we will have to participate, and I want it to be the beginning of the expulsion of the enemy from our native land." We go around with Stolnikov company, trying to talk to each soldier, to learn about the mood. Training at midnight from the positions of the combat guard. We came across the Red Army settled in a semicircle. From the darkness comes baritone Papchenko. He reads Mayakovsky, reads masterfully, passionately, inspirationally, skillfully emphasizing the features of poetic rhyme. I first realized the power of the proletarian poet's verses. "Does not let the soldiers sleep." Stolnikov was indignant. He found time for poetry. He believes in the mobilizing power of poetry. He is convinced that poems can soften a person, set him in a lyrical mood, or stir up feelings of anger, hatred, lift a weakened spirit. I have never heard of such a purpose of poetry, although I am not indifferent to it and adore poets. Hearing voices, Papchenko stopped talking, stepped towards us. Recognizing us, he reported that the platoon was ready for the offensive, and now, at the request of the soldiers, he was reading Mayakovsky to them. Did they ask him to do it themselves? Stolnikov couldn't believe it. Of course. Papchenko shrugs his shoulders. Every free minute they ask for something to read. At night, mortars suddenly started talking on our right, and flares flashed over the enemy positions. Soon fierce firing from all kinds of small arms broke out. Having visited the battalion commander, I learned that at the first hour of the night he had sent a search party to the site of Lieutenant Voronov's company, since our battalion turned out to be a separate unit, and in addition was not advancing in the main direction. Senior Lieutenant Gryzev had to take care of the language himself. The reconnaissance group's sortie failed. However, the scouts found out that there were no minefields all the way to the front. This pleased these. The absence of minefields facilitated the attack and indicated that the enemy was thinking not to defend but to attack. Even before daylight, we were delivered from the Sapper Battalion a prefabricated assault bridge, which the men of Lieutenant Valishnikov's platoon had to throw over the river before the offensive. At dawn, as soon as the enemy stopped artillery and mortar fire on our positions, Stolnikov and I went down to the river. Training in assembling the assault bridge, conducted in the rear, helped. Now the soldiers, under the guidance of the sapper instructor, skillfully built up link by link, and soon the bridge rippled on the water under the weight of Lieutenant Valeshnikov, who ran across it. Returning to his shore, the lieutenant half-voiced, comrade, the crossing is ready." The pre-dawn fog rose above the river and flooded the coastal bushes. No matter how hard we tried to noiselessly set up the crossing, the fascists apparently heard the splashes. Suddenly fountains of exploding nicey mines rose along the whole river. Fortunately, no one was hurt. We secretly returned to the trenches. At 4:30 at the positions of the battalion, everything froze. The silence was broken only by fascist machine gunners, methodically firing short bursts. Stolnikov grinned. It was as if robots were standing behind the machine guns. It was quite light, although the sun's rays had not yet gilded the horizon. The air was fresh and clean in the morning. The gunpowder ash had not yet soaked it, had not absorbed the odors of the grass. Stolnikov and I go up to the attic of a 2-storied stone building and scrutinize the opposite shore, flat and open. Imagining how difficult it would be to cross it under machine gun fire, I shivered. Yes, it's a cool morning today, Stolnikov noticed, having understood my involuntary movement in his own way. Artillery preparation began at exactly 8 in the morning. The sun was our ally. It blinded the fascist observers. The whistle of shells was drowned out by the howl of mines. Artillery and mortar units supporting us were firing. In the air rose a red rocket, the signal to force the river. Under cover of machine gun fire of Kalinin's and Papchenko's platoons, Lieutenant Valejnikov's men rushed to the assault bridge and began to run quickly to the opposite bank. German mortars started talking. Somewhere nearby a wounded man cried out, muffled. Papchenko crawled to the groan. From experience I knew that a fire attack can temporarily paralyze the will. Someone must be the first to leave the shelter. I couldn't do it myself. I had to push the rest of the company to the opposite bank. I met a glance with Stolnikov. Understanding me, the politruk quietly, as if to himself, "Here it is, a thunderous minute, and jumping out of hiding. Shout, 'Follow me, comrade.'" Kalinin rolled down after the political officer, and the men of his platoon rushed after him. Waving my hand to Senior Lieutenant Papchenko, I hurried to the assault bridge. I jump on the rickety, unstable planks, look back and see Papchenko descending surrounded by soldiers, waving his arms and shouting something on the way. Finally, we can breathe a sigh of relief. Platoon commanders reported that the crossing ended without. We are waiting for the signal to begin the attack. Next to me sets the bayonet in combat position my new orderly Metin. Nearby is located control group, Polivoda Seroshtan, Lisov, Brazhenko, Vostrikov, Susik, Okremenko and his faithful assistant Fedya are absent. They organize food, ammunition and evacuation of the wounded. I voluntarily admire Stolnikov. I, who has already been in fierce battles, can hardly keep calm, and the political officer, running from fighter to fighter, says something that makes many people smile. "What joyful news have you brought, Vadim Nikolaevich?" I asked when the politruk returned. I told the soldiers that our units advancing along the Minsk highway broke into the enemy's location and smoked the fascists out of their holes. Noticing that Seroshtan was concentrating on gnawing a breadcrumb, he jokingly asked, "Vasily Andreevich, are you destroying your NZ? Watch if Okremenko sees you, you'll lose your hair." "Nothing, comrade political officer," laughingly answers the sergeant. "I'll borrow provisions from the fascists when we come to them. I don't think they'll need it." The cloudless sky is streaked by a rocket, the signal of attack, and I can't bring myself to jump up. I should. This is the law. In the decisive moment, the commander must be in front. I make a huge effort, jump up and with a machine gun in my hands without looking back, running as if at a sprinter's distance. I think I shout loudly the call forward, but I don't hear my voice. No gunshots either. I can only guess them by the whistle of bullets. I feel that the fascists are not aiming fire, otherwise they would have laid me on the raw Mother Earth. The nearest trenches are about 100 meters away. With joy, I make sure that all companies are running almost on the same line with us. Here on the right and left broke through hurrah AAA, and picked up by hundreds of heated throats, ancient battle cry invades the noise of battle. Exploding grenades force the Nazis to hide in the trenches. This helps us to overcome the remaining meters. We jump on their heads. We see the faces of enemy soldiers distorted by anger and fear, and the hatred that has accumulated in the soul spills out in a furious cry. The exasperation is mutual. I see how Vasil Seroshtan pressed the red-haired brat against the wall of the trench and grabbed him by the throat. I cut off 2 fleeing fascists with a short burst and suddenly fell under the weight of the body that collapsed on me. I threw him down, turned around, and my heart was pierced by Mitin. 2 huge stains are blurred on his uniform. Apparently, the fascist who was squirming under Stefan Polivoda, who had piled on top of him, was aiming at me but hit my. Petrenko runs up, tearing a bandage bag on the move. Looking into the motionless face of Mitin, sighed heavily and closed his eyes. The fascists are resisting fiercely. Particularly fierce battle raged on the right flank of the battalion, closer to the railroad, where Lieutenant Voronov's company and a battalion of militiamen. They are being counterattacked by the reserves coming up from the station, which noticeably emboldens the defenders. Their resistance is increasing along the entire front. Hearing the growing noise on the right flank, where Papchenko's platoon is fighting, I hurry there. Brashenko and Polivoda are not lagging behind me. On the run, I notice how Stolnikov, having thrown a grenade, quickly jumped into the nearest trench. I jumped after him. Stolnikov fiercely fights off the Germans attacking him with a captured rifle. Hearing my command, "Get down," he falls to the bottom of the trench, and I give a few short bursts. "Now, Serpchenko." I shout through the crackle of shots. "Alive?" 5 minutes ago he was alive. Now I can't vouch for it. The battle continues. The Red Army is pushing the fascists. Here a tall fascist, unable to endure, jumps out of the trench, throws his rifle and, waving his arms, runs away with a desperate cry. I raised my automatic rifle, but immediately lowered it, remembering how contagious panic is. And immediately I was convinced that I had done the right thing. The heart-rending cries of a fleeing man make confusion in the ranks of the Hitlerites. Having just fought desperately, they look around frightened and one by one turn their backs. Only on the shoulders of the fleeing we can break into the next line of trenches without losses. Shouting, I rushed after the fleeing fascists. Suddenly, the Germans, who have turned into flight, fall down like ears cut off by the stroke of an experienced man. In the calculated cruelty of the Nazis, I have already had the opportunity to make sure, and yet cold-blooded, almost at point-blank range, shooting their soldiers, in order to delay the attackers, makes me inwardly shudder. Surviving Germans are screaming in despair. Nitschikas, Nitschitius, Nitschis. Throwing the last grenade on the move, I run, instinctively realizing that salvation is in speed. There's no turning back. If we stop and turn around, we'll all be shot, like grouse at a grouse rush. The fighters are not lagging behind me. By the small density of fire, I guess that the Nazis have few automatic weapons. That's good for us. After all, a rifle needs not only an accurate but also a cold-blooded shooter. And when a horde of furious, shouting people with rifles is rushing at you, even the bravest man's hand will tremble. So we, you might say, ran safely to the second line of trenches. And everything is repeated again. It turns out that a man gets used to even the utter hell. If in the first battles everything flashed before my eyes in a kind of fog and actions were determined by the instinct of self-preservation, now I distinguished details, watched the battle as if from the outside and tried to influence its outcome. Suddenly I heard the loud voice of Siroshtan. "Comrade Commander, looks. The Germans are hurrying up to us, and indeed several dozen fascists are approaching the place where Papchenko's platoon is fighting. I order the machine gunners to concentrate fire on them and send Suzak to warn Papchenko about the threatening danger to him." With satisfaction, watching the work of machine gunner Boris Ulibian. From his short and accurate bursts of fascists, ridiculously bouncing, fall to the ground and no longer rise. I sigh with relief and, nodding to Siroshtan, Brashenko and Vostrikov, I jump out of the trench and run to another shelter. I make a last dash, want to jump into the trench, and suddenly, with horror, I notice a dagger-shaped bayonet aimed at my chest. I couldn't stop or jump aside. I instinctively kicked the bayonet away, and with all my weight I fell on the fascist and glimpsed an officer ahead of me who was aiming at me with a pistol. The bullet whistled near my ear. Raising my head, I see Vasil Siroshtan pulling a bloody bayonet from the officer's throat. Once again Vasil saves me from death. I should thank him, but there's no time. "All right," I said to myself after the battle, "I'll give him a friendly hug and sigh. Thank you, friend." I did not allow myself to think that I would not have such an opportunity. Combat sent a liaison with an order to continue the attack on the station. The liaison reported that our units attacking along the Minsk highway reflect a fierce counterattack of the fascists, supported by tanks, so there now decides the success of the offensive, and the breakthrough of our and Moscow communist battalions to the station will help the main forces. I returned to Lieutenant Kalinin's platoon and was waiting for the signal for a new attack when I heard alarming cries. There, tanks, tanks? I involuntarily shuddered when I saw the familiar squat Nazi tank slowly crawling out from behind the houses nearest to the station. In the midst of a sultry July day, I suddenly feel cold. However, the acute anxiety about how the soldiers will behave displaces the fear lurking in my heart. Did Okremenko manage to deliver grenades and bottles of gasoline to the platoons, just so that panic does not break out? These thoughts make me anxiously stare at the battle orders of the platoons. The bustle of the soldiers. They are rapidly dispersing in search of safe shelters, deepen the trenches, gradually calms down. Although the position of the battalion is becoming desperate, the guns supporting us are firing from closed positions, and of course they need time to clarify the data. At that moment a panting Okremenko falls into my trench as if from the sky. Everything is in order, Comrade Commander. He wheezes, holding out to me 2 bottles of gasoline and a bunch of grenades. 20 vials and 8 bundles of grenades were distributed among the platoons. Let them just stick their heads in. The flies will eat them. Now we can't be taken with bare hands. I look lovingly at the steaming face of the petty officer. I want to hug him, but I say deliberately angry. It's not right, Nikolai Fedorovich. We'll soon stretch our legs with hunger. When will you feed us lunch? Okremenko, who took all my words seriously, smilingly replied, "Everything is ready, Comrade Commander. The soup is ready, Comrade Commander. Once we liquidate the tanks, we can..." And bursts are already boiling around the tanks. Apparently, artillery observers are correcting the fire of guns. The vehicles are zigzagging, which slows them down. However, the distance separating us is still noticeably shrinking. Behind the tanks flashes infantry. I'm ordering a chain. Otis Surfins target fire to cut off the infantry from the tanks. The crackle of rifle shots and machine gun bursts intensifies. Why is the machine gun silent? I look at the machine gunners sheltered behind the steel shield Maxim and cannot understand anything. Above the shield then appears and then disappears head, and the machine gun still does not work. I rushed to the machine gun and saw that Ulybin was lying with a bloody head, and his assistant Stenin, a heavy and slow 30-year-old man, was shoving a long, dirty finger into the chamber, cursing, trying with a thick fingernail to catch and extract the torn end of the cartridge case from the chamber. Why not with the extractor? So I shout, falling down beside him and pushing back the confused machine gunner. There's no sign of him. They've lost him. Calm down, calm down. I say to myself, suppressing the cry bursting from my throat and frantically remember how to act. I remembered. I force the cartridge into the chamber and pull back the lock with a sharp jerk. Sighed with relief. The cartridge case fragment was firmly lodged in the upper end of the cartridge. I pull out the tape and, having given a shooting line, pass the handles to Stepan. The latter, having spit out the extinguished cigarette, clenches them with his strong paws and, muttering under his nose, "Well, we'll show them, vipers," and presses the trigger. A long machine gun burst forces the enemy infantry to lie down. I turn my attention to the tanks. There are 6 of them. 3 are coming to the company's positions. I run to my foxhole. Kalinin and Valeshnikov sent liaisons with a report that their soldiers are ready to meet the tanks. I am alarmed by the absence of news from the 3rd platoon. Finally returns out of breath Susik and reports. Then, Politruk in the 3rd platoon. Everything is all right there. The tanks are coming. My attention is riveted to the rifle cells, where Lieutenant Kalinin and his men have taken refuge. There synchronously with the course of one of the tanks moves some black object. I remember the surprise that Kalinin reported to me. One of his sergeants found a German anti-tank mine, tied it with a cable woven from telephone cable. Apparently now the sergeant is trying to drag the mine exactly under the tank's track. Someone's huge palm covered my hand. I heard Okremenko's hoarse whisper, "Flies are eating him. Where is he going?" Surprised, I looked in his direction and saw that the 2nd tank sharply changed its course, going to the firing cells where the machine gunner Stepin and his new assistant, a very young fighter whose name I did not remember. "Hey, the flies are eating him," exclaimed Okremenko, trying to squeeze his heavy body into a narrow rifle cell. "The machine gunners with their Columbine will perish in such a hole. It is necessary to stop the tank before it starts tamping machine gunners and all of us into the ground. Only me and Seroshkin have a bunch of grenades. I want to give the command forward, but my tongue seems to be stuck to my throat. How hard it is to send a man into the fire, and even one who has already saved your life more than once. Suddenly I jump out of the trench with a bottle in my hand. Sebastian is ahead of me. After 5 or 6 meters he falls, then runs again, and with a run he jumps into some trench, next to which the ground, ploughed by machine gun, bursts. They've spotted him. Unable to take my eyes off my dear man, I stopped watching the battlefield. "Ah, Vasil, I whisper excitedly to myself. How can I help you?" And Stepin, with short, accurate bursts, did not let the infantrymen move forward, apparently realizing that from the trench could not throw a heavy bundle. Sebastian rushed to the front of the tank. Here he swung, but his arm hung like a whip. "No trouble." I hear Okremenko's voice full of despair. Vasil's arm was injured, and grabbing a bottle of gasoline, the petty officer rushed to the machine gunners with unexpected agility for his heavy figure. At that time Sebastian, having taken the bundle in his left hand, in 3 or 4 steps from the tank, jerked it down from above and threw it under the caterpillar. A deafening explosion threw him aside. The tank, roaring like a mortally wounded animal, spun on the spot. Having seized the moment, Okremenko jumped up again, and having made several heavy jumps, threw a bottle of gasoline on the engine compartment and fell face down. Is he really dead? Noticing that Okremenko was crawling back, he sighed with relief. The smoker is alive. Without taking my eyes off the bright flames that erupted on the armor, I shot the tankers jumping out of the burning car. They've had enough, and Stepin, like a woodpecker on a hollow tree, continues to tap out short bursts, as if the outcome of the fight with the tank he did not care. I look closely at the battalion's fighting order, and am glad that the battle is going on in the same positions. The enemy infantry is stopped, although 3 Nazi tanks managed to break through to the rear. One of them passed through the positions of Papchenko's platoon. I felt guilty about what had happened and was ready in a fever to turn part of my forces after the tanks, but another trouble made me forget about them for a while. Fear of armoured vehicles was so great that attracted the attention of all the soldiers and commanders. Fire on the Nazi infantry sharply weakened. The Germans took advantage of this. With a loud cry of "Ho!" they broke through to our trenches. Hatred overflowed the hearts of the soldiers, who saw the screaming fascists face to face and pushed them out of the trenches. Almost simultaneously, the whole battalion rose to meet the Nazis. Some irresistible force pushed me too. On the run, assessing the situation, I noticed that the soldiers, grouping around their commanders, as if magnetically attracted enemy soldiers. The chain of them split. The fight took on a focal character. I immediately noticed that in the most difficult position was a platoon of Senior Lieutenant Papchenko. Surrounded fighters led by Stolnikov and Papchenko were threatened with death. There was nowhere to wait for help. Kalinin's and Voleshnikov's platoons were also attacked by the Germans. At this critical moment, I could only dispose of myself and my guardsmen. I rushed forward, not doubting that they would follow me. Soon Okremenko, Brashenko, Vostrykov, Shlevko, Fedya and Susik were on. Okremenko tries to overtake me, beggingly shouts, "Keep quiet, comrade Comrade. I'm suffocating, the flies are eating them." I continue to run without slowing down. Okremenko grumbles angry. "And where is Yogo? The flies are eating them, ahead of your father." Fyodor Brashenko runs to my left. He slowly and smoothly, camel-like, throws forward long, skinny legs, tightly swaddled to the knees with wrappings. Behind him, Shlevko and Fedya are sniffing heavily. Koma Susik clung tightly to the pant leg of Fedya's immense gallifers and was hopping along like a child who couldn't keep up with an adult's broad stride. With his left hand, Koma holds the automatic rifle dangling on his chest. To the right of Okremenko, effortlessly, hurries trained Nikolai Vostrykov. At first, in the crowd of rushing people, it is difficult to distinguish where their own and where the fascists. All mixed up. Up close it became clear that the crowd was divided into 3 isolated groups, surrounded by frantically jumping and screaming fascists. Most of the fighters concentrated around Stolnikov and Papchenko. The fascists noticed the approach of our group too late. We had no more than 36 meters to run when the soldiers closest to us, hearing the stomping, turned their heads. Sebrashenko, like an experienced sprinter at the finish line, was 2 or 3 meters ahead of me. With the cry of "Beat the fascists," he threw a grenade and rushed at the enemies. After the first grenade flew 2 more, mine and Okremenko's. The fascists scattered between the 2 fires. Their onslaught immediately weakened. Using the confusion in the ranks of the fascists, the group of Stolnikov and Papchenko began to squeeze them. Completely transformed our good-natured Okrymenko. His round, chubby-cheeked face, bulldog-like blurred, light blue eyes turned white with anger and rounded up owl-like. When I was attacked from two sides by three douchey fascists, he rushed to the rescue. With a powerful counterstrike, he knocked aside the bayonet of one German, deftly dodged the second and simultaneously gave him a terrible kick in the groin. The soldier curled up, holding his stomach, and with a cry of horror fled from the enraged petty officer. However, the Nazis quickly recovered from the confusion and came at us again. With an unexpected counterattack, they cut in two, the group of Stolnikov and Papchenko, to which Brashenko and Fedya made their way. Together with Red Army soldier Kalugin, they selflessly covered the wounded Papchenko. Sakrimenko, Vostrikov, Slevko, Suzik and I joined with Stoligakov and by common efforts began to break through to Papchenko's group, which was on the edge of death. Like a pack of wolves, sensing the weakness of the pursued, Hitlerites fiercely attacked Papchenko. Our friendly onslaught broke the enemy ring. A few steps separated us from Papchenko, when two stout fascists thrust their bayonets into Kalugin and, having thrown him away, rushed on Papchenko. Noticing the deadly threat to the senior lieutenant, Fyodor Brashenko promptly covered the bleeding Papchenko. Okrymenko and I collapse on the fascists. The petty officer, snatching a rifle from the hands of a falling German, with a lightning-fast movement tore the bayonet from the chest of Fyodor Brashenko. He looked at us with widened eyes and slowly fell on his back. I carefully laid him down next to the bloody senior lieutenant. Now with wounded comrades behind our backs, we could not retreat. The fascists must have realized this. Their onslaught intensified. Fighting off their attacks, I noticed that Suzik was not around. When he fell behind, I didn't see. The fight lasted for some minutes, but it seemed to me that it lasted for a long time. We were fighting back from the last strength when friendly artillery volleys were heard from the side of the railroad bridge. I could not understand where the artillerymen were hitting. Suddenly a hurrah sounded from the left and right. The fascists who were attacking us trembled and ran. I raised my rifle and pulled the trigger, but there was no shot. The magazine was empty. Having loaded a new clip into the magazine, I rushed after the retreating men. We allowed the fascists to break away 60 to 70 meters. This was immediately taken advantage of by enemy machine gunners. The enemy machine gunners immediately took advantage of this. They slapped us with dagger fire, and our chain, like a sea wave coming on a gentle sandy shore, rolled on the grass and fell silent. The enemy's machine gun and mortar fire, intensifying by the minute, forced us to crawl away. A fierce fire duel broke out. The offensive had stalled. Looking around, I realized why the fascist infantry retreated. 3 tanks, which managed to break through to our rear, were burning. The artilleryman had done a good job. Having sent Okrymenko and Fedya to search for Suzik, I glanced at Stolnikov, noticing my surprise. All the Vipers shredded. We'll have to ask the petty officer to get another. This one cannot be repaired. Is the wound serious? I asked anxiously. No, it was scratched by a splinter. Papchenko lost a lot of blood. Nefaciolus, how did you miss the tank? I could not refrain from reproach. 3 bundles were used up and did not get under the caterpillar, Stolnikov answered guiltily. Poorly trained? Stolnikov took the orderly to Papchenko to find out whether the senior lieutenant should be sent to the rear immediately. I followed, but suddenly the commander appeared. I must say that, because of the lack of wire communication during the battle, we have never been able to talk. Report the situation, Lieutenant. He shouted, jumping into the trench and with difficulty catching his breath. There's blood on your face, Comrade Senior Lieutenant, I said sympathetically. The wound is small, but it bleeds. Well, let's talk business. Why didn't you pursue the enemy? I reported that we were stopped by strong machine gun and mortar fire. Combat. What losses in the company? I have not had time to clarify yet, I replied. See, clarify soon and send a report on the number of soldiers remaining in the line on unspent ammunition. Smoking a cigarette, Gryazev said bitterly. You made a mess, let the tanks into the rear. Only one managed to slip through the company's positions. Ian grudgingly clarified and said that the 3rd platoon used all the bundles of grenades, but could not blow up the tank. Not enough trained people. Did not hide the frustration of the commander. Not an easy thing. To throw a bunch of exactly under the caterpillar, here not only strength and skill are needed, and nerves of steel too. After a silence, he threw an unsmoked cigarette at the bottom of the trench and, having forcefully stomped it, tanks made a mess. They razed the battalion headquarters to the ground and destroyed the battalion ammunition station. The commissar and the chief of staff were killed. I was lucky. But the wounded combat gritted his teeth. Bastards! The tank stormed the battalion medical station and began to crush the defenseless wounded. Masha Zarubina, a nurse, stood in its way and, trying to protect the wounded, threw a grenade at point-blank range. She did not move from her place when the tanker cold-bloodedly directed the car directly at her fragile figure. Listening to the commander, I clenched my head with my hands, barely restraining the groaning from my chest. Noticing the tears in my eyes, Gryazev said, "Nothing, we will repay them yet. We have laid down a lot and we will lay down more. Get ready for another attack. I'll go to the 3rd Company. The tanks have done such a thing there." I barely had time to see the commander off as Kalinin and Velezhnikov jumped into the trench. "Will we have to send you to the rear, comrades commanders?" I was saddened when I saw bloody bandages on them. "If we send them to the rear, there won't be a single man left in the company." "You, Kalinin," objected glumly. "The bone is intact. You can step on the leg. And I'll hold the machine gun." The bayonet slashed the muscles below the elbow. "I'm glad you're alive, brothers. I'm glad you're alive. I'm very glad." I really felt how close and dear these people were to me, with whom a few days ago I had not even met. Stelnikov, who returned from the 3rd Platoon, reported that Papchenko had 17 men left in the line. Kalinin and Velezhnikov wore 68 and mortars. All in all, there will be 90 men. This, as I was convinced by my own experience, a great strength. So the company has kept its fighting ability. So we'll still fight. Flashed in my mind. "How many men lost, Commander?" exclaimed the political officer sorrowfully. "How many men? And we haven't taken the station. How can it be, Commander?" What could I say? The fascists lost much more. I tried to console Stolnikov. But can you find words that can diminish the grief of the loss of comrades, in arms with whom you've managed to bond in the battles? For each of us, the first battle, the sight of the first killed and wounded, a serious shock. You get used to many things in war, but you cannot get used to the death of your comrades. Just now they were rejoicing together with you at the success. A quarter of an hour ago they were smiling with friendship. We were calling them by name, and now they are lying there, breathless, sometimes disfigured in such a way that it is impossible to recognize, as it is impossible to recognize the cheerful and charming Vasily Soroshtin in the corpse disfigured by the explosion. We sit over him and still do not believe that we will never hear his cheerful voice again. Next to Soroshtin is Homer Suzik. Fedya crawled around the meadow for a long time before he found him under the corpse of a rather dense fascist. How much we have experienced together. I thought sadly, how many times you, Vasil, took death away from me. Fix on the achieved line. Okremenko, enjoying the respite, immediately organized the delivery to the company of thermoses with lunch stashed somewhere. I instructed him to get ammunition and grenades at any cost, and with the political officer we went to the battalion commander. We found him at a command and observation post completely destroyed by tanks. Senior Lieutenant Gryzin, adjusting the bandage on his head, ordered to report on the state of the company. Having learned about the losses, sighed heavily. It could have been worse, if at the same time with tanks infantry broke into the positions. Comrade combat. Stolnikov spoke irritably. We can't go on the attack when the enemy's fire system is not suppressed, when fascist machine guns don't let us raise our heads. Comrade political officer, Gryazev grumbled annoyingly. Remember, to reliably suppress the enemy's fire system, you need not 20 guns and mortars per kilometre of front, but at least 5 times more. Where to get them? In our battalion, as you know, there is not even a mortar company. It is difficult to attack in such an environment. Did not give up Politruk. Yes, difficult, but necessary, said the commander. I remind you, in the area of Smolensk cut off several of our divisions. They are ordered to fight their way out of the encirclement, and they may find themselves in a desperate situation if we do not help them. Do you agree with me, Lieutenant? Gryazev turned to me. I agree. I resolutely confirmed and added, Comrade Stolnikov can be understood. This is his second battle. I've already experienced something like this. Stolnikov objected with a tear. It is not difficult for us, commanders, to understand this necessity, but how to explain to a Red Army soldier that he must go to the fascist machine guns? Explain the situation to the soldiers, replied the commander. They will understand, oh. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Samolyov, commander of the 2nd Company, and his political commander. Behind them came a lieutenant unfamiliar to. It turns out that the lieutenant is the commander of the 1st Platoon of the 3rd Company. He is the only surviving commander of this company. I could not believe my ears. Voronov was killed. It was as if my heart was crushed by a stone. From the command staff of the mortar company, I was the only one left. Involuntarily flashed the thought, now it's my turn. Having thoroughly questioned the commanders about the state of the companies, Grzyzev announced the time of the new attack, 7 o'clock in the morning. The arrangement of companies' combat slightly changed. The 2nd Company should still attack the station from the south, and our and the 3rd Companies from the side of the crossing, that is, from the east. On the way to his company, suggested Stolnikov to drop by the battalion medical station to learn about the fate of Fyodor Brashenko and Nikolai Vostrikov. I was shocked by the news of the death of both of them. I was staggering with grief. Stolnikov embraced while, "What can you do, Alexander? Don't tear your heart out. Damn war. Cursed fascists." At night, the representatives of the platoons gathered on the site, hidden from the enemy observers by a high, thick shrubbery. The dead were carefully lowered into the grave. I suddenly wanted to close my eyes and imagine that all this is a nightmare dream. But Stolnikov's voice brings me back to reality. "Dear comrades," he says, "today we are seeing off our battle buddies to their last journey. May the Smolensk earth be their souls. All of them honestly fulfilled their duty to the motherland. They sacrificed their lives to save the fighters and commanders fighting their way out of the encirclement. Eternal glory to the fallen heroes." Throwing a farewell handful of earth, I noticed that Okremenko carefully put some object on Kolmaz Suzik's chest. I took a closer look, a telephone set. It was so unlike our thrifty petty officer. By midnight I was so exhausted that I sat down for a moment to rest, and instantly fell asleep, as they say, dead asleep. I woke up because someone was shaking me by the shoulder. Comrade Komroti, Comrade Komroti. Okremenko was buzzing above my ear, tickling my face with his mustache. Get up quickly. Trouble, the flies are eating her." "What trouble?" I shrieked, grabbing the petty officer by his uniform. "What happened? Hurry up and tell me, Okremenko." I shook poor Nikolai Fedorovitch so much that he couldn't utter a word, only mooed unintelligibly. Finally, coming to my senses, I let him go. The traitor, eat his flies, has been caught. He didn't have time to run away to the fascists. You viper. The Politruk ordered me to report. Where's the traitor? In the 2nd Platoon. In the trench, adapted by Veleshnikov as an observation post. I come across Stolnikov. In front of him is some huddled figure in a uniform with a torn sleeve. "What happened, comrades?" Stolnikov waved his hand. "It's my fault that this bastard," he nodded at the defector, "yesterday did not agree to transfer to the special department. Let Veleshnikov report what happened. He saw everything from beginning to end." "There's nothing to report," reluctantly began the platoon commander. At the 4th hour, the orderly pushed me hard in the side and shouted, "Comrade Lieutenant, someone with a white flag is going to the German." On the left flank, waving a white rag over his head, some fighter is walking towards the enemy and shouting, "Nitschis, Nitschis," exactly as parachutists shouted when they surrendered. And in front of him at full speed, as at 100-meter distance, flies Savinov. Fortunately, the Nazis overslept. While they figured out what was going on, Savinov ran to the traitor and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him back. "Well, it was in vain," I remarked, hardly restraining my rage. "You should have shot the scoundrel like a mad dog." For what? Because I hate war and don't want to shed human blood? I am a pacifist, like my father and my brothers who live in England." The unexpected outburst of the traitor literally stunned everyone. "There it is," broke the silence Stolnikov. "All of us, it turns out, murderers, and he is so humanistic that even on the fascist cannot raise a hand." Turning to me, Stolnikov concluded, "This scoundrel is trying to justify treason by some political set form. Let's send him to the rear. Let them sort it out there." An hour later, the commander came to us, seeing me and Stolnikov. He, instead of greeting, exclaimed, "You humanists found time to study the motives of treason. A coward and a traitor always remains a coward and a traitor. You should have shot the bastard on the spot, not set work for the tribunal. And now listen to the task." Dense rain clouds closed the horizon, and the grey sky was low to the ground. The approaching rain was joyful. We were incredibly tired from the July heat. The first volleys of cannon and mortars blew up high fountains of smoke and dust in the enemy's position. It seemed that not a single firing point could survive there. Indeed, no machine gun or machine gun bursts were heard from the enemy trenches. Waving over my head with a captured machine gun, I ran forward. On the right flank of the company, I noticed Stolnikov, almost simultaneously with me, jumped out on the berm of the trench. No sooner had we run than 30 meters, as the dust over the front line of enemy trenches began to settle, and bullets whistled around. Fascist machine gunners fired long bursts. Short-click-com wedged automatic rifles. I felt as if I had a red-hot rod on my left arm. Is it really serious? The thought burns, but shaking my left hand, I immediately calmed down. A scratch, as Vasily Soroshtin used to say, as if running into an invisible obstacle. The fighters are falling. Suddenly, Lieutenant Kalinin drops his automatic rifle. Realizing that with such a fire to run to the enemy trenches will be able to few, I shout at the top of my voice, "Lie down." Looking around, I realized that the 3rd Company had laid down even earlier. Only on the left flank of the soldiers of Lieutenant Samoylov short runs to the line of German trenches. Their machine guns, for some reason, silent. Crawl forward, and I plough the ground with my nose first. Each step forward costs a huge physical effort. My uniform is soaked with sweat. It runs down my steamed face, corrodes my eyes, my wounded arm starts to sore. I wipe away the sweat with a dusty sleeve and continue to crawl, whispering to myself. Forward, forward. The piercingly increasing whistle of the mine makes me instinctively press into the ground. The ground shakes, splinters jingle on my helmet, lumps of dried earth raised in the air drum on my body. An 81mm mortar is firing. Fortunately, the vast majority of mines lie behind the company. It's good that we've advanced. Another lesson: the closer you are to the enemy, the safer you are from his artillery and more. The battalion commander is trying to help the companies that are lying low. The 45mm cannon salvos reached their goal. The nearest machine guns, which did not allow us to raise our heads, were silenced. Noticing that 24 meters ahead of us began to burst enemy grenades, I guessed that the Nazi trenches were no more than 70 meters away. After waiting for the whole company to get closer, I shouted to Polyvoda and Lysov, who were lying next. "Tell them, prepare to attack." My body involuntarily tensed, gained the strength of a compressed spring. It seemed that if it straightened, and the body in an unexpected jerk will overcome the death zone. The squad commander Stepan Polyvoda, who was lying on my right, must have noticed my preparations for a rush. He suddenly jumped up in all his considerable height, made 3 rapid jumps, threw a grenade with a wild shout, and turning to me with an effort, his face contorted with a grimace of pain, slowly settled down, holding his stomach. A dull pain tore at my heart. I realized that I was losing another of my battle buddies. The whole company came up. At such moments you involuntarily become stronger and braver. The sense of self-preservation disappears. All thoughts are concentrated on one desire: to run to the enemy as soon as possible. A multitude of simultaneously arisen targets scatter his attention, and grenade bursts bring confusion to the ranks of the defenders. This alone can explain the fact that the fire they are firing almost at point-blank range is inflicting fewer casualties on us than at the beginning of the attack. And so I can shout and, throwing a grenade on the run at the enemy, shooting from a machine gun. A somewhat thinned chain of attackers with a shout of hurrah burst into the enemy trenches. Don't delarders or don't delay. Immediately break through to the step, but I hesitate to give the familiar command attack. 4 platoon commanders are wounded, and only Valeshnikov is still on his feet, and the dense machine gun and machine gun fire from the outskirts of the station does not allow to stick his head out of the trench. Especially fierce shooting is heard from the side of the highway and railroad, over which fascist planes are constantly hovering. Suddenly a tall sergeant with a machine gun appears. He gives a folded sheet of paper from the battalion commander. Since holding the sheet, torn from a school notebook. I read to the commander of the 1st Company. Parts of the 38th Infantry Division and a battalion of Moscow Communists successfully reflect the 3rd counterattack. I ought to not delay, immediately break through to the station. However, immediately break through to the station I could not. There was a forfeit at the junction with the neighbour on the right. Stolnikov, who was always in the 3rd platoon, reported that the positions of the company neighbouring us broke through about 60 fascists, who pushed it back and threatened to hit the rear of your company. Having reported about this threat, Stolnikov raised the platoon to attack and helped the 3rd Company to repel the counterattack. Returning, sadly waved his hands. The 3rd Company has no one to continue the attack. The tanks have inflicted irreparable losses on it. Well, if it will hold on to the positions occupied. If on the right of us, in the area of the railway and highway, the advance of the offensive noticeably stalled and every metre there got after a fierce battle, and on the left flank Samoilov's company, and the 2nd Battalion of militiamen broke through to the outskirts of the station village, and with a fight moved towards the station. I hastily gather the company to continue the attack. Suddenly appears the battalion commander. His left hand hangs on a bandage. His face expresses extreme irritation and fatigue. "Why did you stop?" He shouts. "Why do not attack? Samolov and militiamen are already approaching the station. We must help them." Having heard my report, Gryazev took me by the sleeve with his healthy hand. "I ask you very much, Altunin. Raise everyone who can hold a weapon and immediately knock the enemy from the crossing. This will help both the militia and Samoilov." Deadly tired, Gryazev sinks heavily to the ground, and Stolnikov and I prepare the men for a new attack. Noticing that he wrinkles from the pain caused by a hastily bandaged through bullet wound in his forearm, I suggest that he go to the infirmary, but the political officer shook his head in silence and ran to the 3rd Company to raise it in the attack at the same time with ours. Having received a message from Stolnikov about the readiness of the 3rd Company to attack, I raise my men and lead to the railroad crossing. Intense machine gun fire forces us to lie down. Suddenly, a few behind us artillerymen, on their hands, roll out a 45mm gun, and 4 accurate shots silence the machine guns. And a rifle and machine gun fire, we advance in short runs. The crossing is like in the palm of our hands. The last, most difficult meters are left. How my heart beats. My undershirt is sticking to my body with hot compress. My uniform is darkened with sweat. Before a decisive throw, at least a small respite is necessary. After all, these meters must run at maximum speed, and then be ready to fight with the enemy hand to hand. I wait until Stolnikov pulls up the 3rd Company. I pass the chain, prepare to attack, but I have no time to raise the men. About 80 fascists, encouraging themselves with shouts of forverts, run at us with rifles. The counterattack was unexpected. Soldiers without a command open salvo fire on the enemy. In action come 5 automatic rifles and 2 handheld machine guns. Machine gunners surprisingly calculated and meticulously distribute short bursts on the broken chain of fascists. Only a third of them overcame half of the distance to our chain, and probably few would have run. I involuntarily shuddered, imagining what fate awaited us if our attack was met with the same dense and accurate fire. The surviving Hitlerites suddenly, as if on command, turned back. It was a very favourable moment to break through to the crossing. Striving not to miss it, I jumped forward and ran without looking back. The distance to the crossing is short. Here is the barrier, a few more seconds, and I will skip it. Suddenly, a grenade fell from somewhere from the side under my feet, and an explosion went off, blinding me. By inertia, I took a few steps and fell into a dark abyss. I regained consciousness from the sharp pain. It is difficult to determine how much time had passed. It's still light. I'm lying on a cloak tent which is being dragged somewhere by a fighter. Explosions force him to fall to the ground every minute. The battle, apparently, is still going on. "Where are you dragging me?" I thought I was shouting, but the question has to be repeated twice before the fighter hears my weak voice. Turning to me, he shouts joyful, "You live, comrade lieutenant." "Alive?" The fighter's broad face, covered with light youthful fuzz, shone with affection. Fedya, who is glad to recognize in the saviour a boy from a Belarusian village. "Alive and well?" "Alive and well," Fedya confirmed with pride. "You can't take us with bare hands. God won't give us away. A fascist pig won't eat us." "Did you get the station?" "We did, comrade lieutenant. We came at it from all sides and beat the fascists visibly and invisibly." Fedya added, and many of our men were killed there. Comrade political officer was the only one left, but he was wounded in the shoulder. Comrade petty officer was wounded in the leg. I found a thick stick for him. He's slowly walking with it, just like my great-grandfather. Mykola Ketvedorovich is a good man. You, Fedya smiled affectionately. I wanted to help him to get to the medical station. And he said, "You, Kevedor, deliver the commander as soon as possible, or, God forbid, he will die. That's because you didn't regain consciousness." What about the company? I hurried the silent guy. The station has been taken by ours. For a moment, Fedya shone, but immediately bowed his head sadly. Comrade Lieutenant Kalinin was killed. Comrade Lieutenant Valeshnikov was killed too. Comrade Senior Lieutenant Papchenko died of a wound. Or is Polyvoda badly wounded? I asked with a secret hope. Yourself as a Comrade Polyvoda is dead. Fedya sighed heavily, and after a moment's silence, added 2 burst bullets in his stomach. He suffered for an... And Petrenko... Questions like splinters stuck on my tongue, which was no longer obeying me. I try to brush away the drops of sweat, but for some reason my fingers turn red. The last thing I see is Fedya's frightened face, and I lose consciousness again.